how do we stop being a pain in the neck for developers because we ask them to do something and they have no personal interest in doing it because they're not measured on security and on the contrary on velocity? And two, how do we jump into that AI wave to create something that is absolutely new in terms of even philosophy of how we do security in that world?
That voice you just heard, that's Jerome Robert. Jerome is tackling one of the oldest fights in the software world, velocity versus security. If you're a developer, you know the pain. Security tools often feel like a cop pulling you over right when you're trying to speed up. But Jerome is building something different at Symbiotic Security. We dig into why traditional shift left security is broken, how to hire for constructive conflict, and why he slept way better as a CMO than he does as a founder. Let's get into it. Quick icebreaker question for you. So you've been in cybersecurity for 20 years? Long time?
Ish,
Ish?
22, I think, 23.
Yeah. But be honest, do you sleep better as a CMO or as a CEO?
Oh, I slept better as a CMO for sure, like 200%. No comparison.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's a different set of stresses, I would imagine.
Yeah, different stress, different, I'm gonna say, solitude somehow. You know what I mean? Like I have a co-founder. We have an extremely close relationship. We've known each other for 17 years. We've worked together for 5 years before we launched the company. We have a long story together. Still, I do think it's a very solitary function sometimes, CEO. And so, yeah, it's a way more pressurized environment for sure than when I was CMO. Even though I had a lot of personal commitment into the company, I was an investor in the company before I joined Alced, to take that example. But still, it feels different.
Yeah, for sure. Lonely at the top, they say, right? And it's very true. True. So I'd love to get into your origin story about, symbiotic security and what was the moment where you're like, wow, this approach is broken and I need to do something about it. So, you've written, I think that traditional security tools are basically nagging developers, right? It kind of goes back to the being a cop, not a coach. And so you're building symbiotic, so be in the flow, right? So it's happening as you're writing code. Was there a specific moment at maybe a previous company or at some given time where you looked at the industry and said, man, this current approach is broken and I have to build the fix myself?
Yeah, there was a factor of things, I guess. There was personal experience of myself, but my co-founder as well has been in code security for a while, in application security for a while. I was in vulnerability management before I created Symbiotic. So I could see more of the downstream consequences of code that was bad, right? And I could see like that huge market and huge efforts from customers to cope with the fact that we weren't able to solve the problem at its core, meaning at the code level. So there's also a second factor that is completely external to us. We are back in 2023 when we start brainstorming with my co-founder Edward on what would come next, and there was AI. And so we also were thinking, you know what, like the way we manufacture software is changing radically. The role of the developers is going to change radically. There's both an opportunity here and a need to do things differently so that we adapt to that new reality. And we were convinced, I'm still convinced that it's a crowded market, the AppSec market, but we were convinced that the incumbents would not have the flexibility, the agility to jump into that new way of doing things. And we're still believing in this very, very much. So this is like the founding thesis, I guess, of Symbiotic is how do we stop being a pain in the neck for developers because we ask them to do something and they have no personal interest in doing it because they're not measured on security and on the contrary on velocity. And two, how do we jump into that AI wave to create something that is absolutely new in terms of even philosophy of how we do security in that world?
Yeah,
Does that make
fascinating.
sense?
Especially given that we're pushing software engineers to increase velocity and we know it's possible, hopefully, utilizing AI tools. But then along the way, we still have to keep this all the security stuff in mind. And instead of post production security checks, like, oh, well, we just got nailed with this security issue, catching it early. So I guess your take is incorporate this in the everyday flow that's already happening, which involves kind of a change in a process a little bit. But it sounds like your tool makes that change really easy.
Yeah, it's very seamless for developers because everything we do it at the time when they need it and only at that time. So it's not like, oh, I'm done working on my code. I pushed my code for other to review and then I sit and do something else. And then 2 hours later, one day later, a week later, I receive an alert that says, hey, you've done a bad job. It's really when I'm coding, when I'm creating something, when my AI is writing code for me that I get what I need for security, which means it's small bites, you
Yeah.
know? Like if I'm, let's say one part of the solution, for example, is training.
Mm,
Like I think it is notorious that training and secure code training in particular is a pain for developers because it's very interruptive, right? Training them on something they don't care about in a way that's very interruptive and lowers their velocity. How
yeah.
can they like
Yeah.
that? So the way we typically do it so that we make it not a pain for them is to say, well, you are intent on fixing that vulnerability because we made you aware that it's like policy breaching, whatever, right? So now you're gonna get a not an afternoon of training, you're gonna get 2 minutes of code-based training right there in your IDE about that problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
We're not trying to make you learn cybersecurity as a practice that would be a huge endeavor you don't care about. We're trying to help you solve a problem you have now,
Yeah.
right? So it's a lot about being centered around what the developer needs rather than what the security team needs and tries to enforce onto developers.
Yeah. I love that. So let's talk about you've got a unique background, right? You got a degree in mathematics. So obviously, you're a very logical, technical type thinker. You ended up as CMO and then transitioned to somewhat technical CEO role. So I'm just curious, how has your background in that CMO type work and positioning kind of impacted or changed how you build the product?
I think so. Back to my story since the very beginning, I think what made me jump from I'm going to be very deep tech, doing crypto algorithms for low compute environments. So, like stuff that are complicated, honestly,
Yeah.
back at the time where we didn't have iPhones
Yeah.
and stuff like this, right? What made me move from this to, oh, I'm going to do marketing, right? It took some
Yeah.
years, but
Yeah. Yeah.
still, that was the trajectory, was I love being in the shoes of the users,
Mm,
right? And my first experience with this was those low compute environments because when you were adapting algorithms or implementations of algorithms for the phones we had at the time or the in-flight entertainment that we had at the time, those were different compute environments. So you had to understand very clearly what was the need and of the customer and what was the context and the constraints of a given environment for a customer. That aspect of things, like adapting what we were doing to specific customer needs, that really got me fascinated with, okay, I need to talk to those people. I need to understand their problems. And that's what made me move to progressively product understanding, product marketing CMO. And I think so back to your question, how does that influence the CEO I am? Is I think that's something I'm pretty good at, like being in the shoes of our targets, anticipating a little, like I'm not an
yeah.
oracle. I wish I was, but anticipating a little what their needs will be or what they think their needs will be
Yeah.
in the near future is something that I think has had an impact on Symbiotic, hopefully positively, but I'll tell you that in a couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that is a skill that we have to practice, right? It's easy to lose touch of that. It's easy to stop doing that because you get busy. And I think it's an important reminder for all the CEOs and founders out there that are maybe a little less connected to their customers to make sure that you're getting those connections. Make sure you're revisiting and able to do what you just said, put yourself in your customer's shoes.
There are other kinds of CEOs out there that are so visionaries that they somehow can get out of touch with their customers because they feel that's where everything is
Yeah.
going. And they are right, which amazes
Yeah.
me. It's not who I am. Like, I'm more about, hey, I'm going to discuss with a bunch of you right now, and I'm going to kind of try to predict where you will be in 6 months.
Yeah.
And that's already like great and how I can work,
Yeah.
not the big visionary 10-year trajectory kind of thing.
Right. Which is super fascinating that there's people that can do that. And also pretty amazing when you think about just how quickly, just look at AI, like how quickly that's influenced your product.
Oh yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I always find that interesting, kind of how people go from point A to point B. And I'm sure we could probably
Right.
spend an hour talking through what that looked like, but maybe next time. I'd love to shift into talking about, you know, you've got the shift left security space, which is a phrase I hadn't really heard much about until I started researching your company. But that space seems to be growing very, very quickly. There's a lot of competitors in it. You know, you've got giants like Sneak, GitHub is playing in the
Yeah.
space. So, even with your strong marketing background, what would you say is the hardest part of the story to tell right now? Is it getting developers to care? Or is it getting them to realize you're different from maybe the 50 other tools that they see out there?
It's probably the latter, right? I think because if you look superficially, at the end of the day, we're trying to solve for the same problem, which is, we're trying to do something so that your code is not a liability to you,
Mm.
right? And to your company. But the way we do it is way more effective, cost efficient, but that requires explanations. You know what I mean? You need to get into the substance and be able to have that opportunity to spend at least 10, 15 minutes with someone to get into, hey, here's what we have that is so different. And I guess that's the magic of a good messaging and good positioning. When people can immediately, like, somewhat, like, put you in a space of their brain that is clearly labeled as, hey, they are doing this, and that box is different from the incumbents,
Yeah.
right? And so our positioning is AI heavy, not as, hey, we're using AI to solve your problems, which is true by the way, but we are solving your AI problems. And that kind of sets us apart when we discuss with customers, and that translates into, like, that's a claim that translates into a lot of product features and way we do things very differently compared to our competition.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you guys hitting kind of taking a bottom up approach? So enticing the developers and then kind of getting them to convince, hey, we need to pay for this tool? Or is it kind of more top down or a blend of the two?
It's hard to have truly a product-led growth motion at our stage where the user might be the developer, but the payer will be the security people, right?
Yeah.
So that transition from I'm a free user to I'm a paid user is not that smooth.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're starting top down. However, we do have, like, I don't want to say a PLG approach, but we have a free tier approach where we definitely try to convince developers to use our product so that when we, in our top-down approach, when we go and talk to a CISO, for example, and we tell them, well, you know what, actually 20 of you guys are already using the product, like, that makes the conversation easier
Right. Hey, it's already adopted. We just need you to pay.
and to get it more adopted.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah, that
Ish,
was a pre-seed,
pre-seed.
actually.
Okay.
No, yeah, no, no. That was the pre-seed was 3 million. I'm saying that because undisclosed thing
Yeah.
is we raised a new round and we're going to announce it in a couple of weeks.
Oh,
So we have a seed round
congrats.
completed a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
Thank you.
congratulations. That's a lot of work every time you have to do one of those. So props to you. But that's even more of a signal that it's time to start scaling revenue, right? So right now, are you still the primary person closing the big deals?
I'm the account executive. We have another account executive in Europe, but our first market is here in the
Yeah,
US and I'd say North America in general.
got it. So at what point do you worry that, you selling becomes the bottleneck or a company's speed?
I hope we'll never get to this, honestly, and we'll be able to anticipate things. Like I always like to have the organization in place for the next 6 months, not for the last 6 months,
Yeah,
which means it looks overkill at any given point in time, but it's ready for the next
yeah,
stage. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So hopefully we won't get there. I think the point in time when I'm not going to be the primary account executive is not because of bandwidth. I think that's when I will have a very high certainty about a playbook, a
Mhm.
target type, a persona, a way of doing things, a messaging, etc. that I think, okay, this is repeatable. And now I can stack resources doing the exact same thing and it's going to scale, right? I'm at the point in time where we are very successful, but it's still a lot of me, a lot of my passion, a lot of my explanations in there. And we definitely need to transition to something that is stackable.
You're still in the kind of ad hoc stage, right? And you're like, oh yeah, I can solve that. Here, let me pull this knowledge and some of this knowledge, and oh, I know this workaround, and yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, it's an exciting place to be. Of you're kind of in that discovery phase a little bit, right? Of like, okay, what resonates with who, and who do we want more of, and how can I just turn that into something I can just rubber stamp and go hire however many people I need to
Exactly.
hire.
And let's take the time to formalize it, to make it a process. There's that as well. We are at the stage where we've had enough engagement and customer interactions and paid customers that we know what works. Now we need to turn that into a process on top of doing all the operational thing, on top of doing all the strategy thing. So, some focus. But we are hiring. We have a bunch of people coming in the next few weeks, actually, that are going to help there. And I'm very confident that we'll get to that stackable
Yeah.
space very quickly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Good. So I'd love to talk, since you mentioned you've got some more people joining, into talking about leadership and culture. I think I read somewhere that one of the core values of Symbiotic is constructive conflict, which I love. But as you scale the team this year, how do you hire for that? Like, how do you look for someone that has that trait?
I guess by disagreeing with them right from the beginning. So we have I think a like pretty standard hiring process. We have a first screening call, then we have more of an in-depth conversation with me typically. Then we go through a case. So if it's for people at the in engineering, it's a technical case. Go to markets, the business case. So things that are pretty standard, right?
Yeah.
For sales, we have some role play, whatever. The one thing I always do, I think, is disagreeing with them, even if I actually agree with them. It doesn't really matter, right? I want to see how they react. And and listen, I do this when I say conflict constructively and positively. It means that conflict might not be the right word, right? I'm contradicting them. I'm not like I'm, I'm not screaming
Yeah.
at the microphone, but I'm just saying I'm just challenging them. And again, like even when they're right, and actually it's even more interesting to see when they are right and you are contradicting them. Like how does that work exactly?
Yeah.
So role play, for example, when you do role play with a BDR or a salesperson, there's always a second take.
Yeah.
I always cut at some point and say, wait a second. Here's like, let me give you like 2 minutes of feedback on that first take. And then you can take as long as you want, like 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of like thinking about it. And then we do another take. I'm always very interested to see how they've moved from what they changed, if they did, how did they react to the feedback. I think that's super important.
Love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to include that when I talk to people, just purposely throwing a little bit of that in and see how they react. Because you're right. You want someone who can feel comfortable with that because that means they're going to give good feedback, which is super important.
Exactly.
And they're willing to accept feedback, right? Someone else's differing view and opinion and be able to hold it against their own and say, okay, which one of these do I need to do? So they're coachable at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And eventually they are the ones that are going to be the closest to the field. And so I want them to feel comfortable coming to me and say, well, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
We need to change that. But at least that conversation happens,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I would be very, very afraid if I were building an organization where people don't dare come to me and say you were wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Plus, what a boring place to work.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit about this comes up all the time when you're selling a B2B SaaS, especially when we're in the economy that we have right now where every dollar is being scrutinized. And so when you're talking to investors or customers, how do you prove the ROI of better code security? Like that seems like it's almost the same as like how do you measure a productive engineer, right? You're like, how many lines of code did they write? No, that's not good. It kind of falls into that same camp. And so I'm just curious how you guys approach that.
It's actually pretty simple. Like I've worked in cyber for forever, and I've always talked about ROI. We have to talk about ROI. In many cases, I don't want to say it was BS, but in many cases, it was somewhat unmeasurable things like your brand damage, your customer trust is going to suffer, stuff like this, which is true, but it doesn't feel like to someone who needs to spend like six-figure money on your contract, it doesn't feel like existential threat or imminent danger. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Like it doesn't create that compelling event. In the case of code security and how we approach things, when we go to potential customers and they start trying the product, we go into boot camps and stuff like this. We take some time, it's not very complicated, to compute the time they spent remediating stuff,
Mhm.
right? It's not about truly, the ROI is not calculated in terms of a how your security is going to be improved with us, but more about a with us, it takes that much time to fix something. And historically, and you verified it during the bootcamp, and historically, here's how much it costs you to fix any given vulnerability, right? And so the ROI is actually pretty immediate, and it covers, like typically we say on average we capture 6-7% of the actual ROI
Yeah.
as a license
Oh,
cost.
that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so we're getting close on time here. And one thing that I like to do at the end of each one of these is I call it the Foundry Molten moment. So this is kind of where it all boils down to. So let me ask this question. So let's fast forward 12 months. If Symbiotic misses its aggressive growth targets for next year, what do you think will be the structural reason why? Will it be that the tech didn't ship fast enough? Market just didn't hear the message clearly enough? Couldn't hire fast enough? What do you think?
Interesting. I don't think none of those, in the sense that if we don't hire fast enough, like that would definitely impact the results, but that wouldn't, like, we didn't miss our targets like dramatically because we didn't hire fast
Yeah,
enough. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like we would be 30% less, but we wouldn't be like,
a
oh, this is a
huge miss.
failure. The
Yeah.
indications are, yeah, indication is that we should stop or something. One thing might be how early are we versus the market,
Mm.
right? So typically, like I said, we're really focused on securing that new AI powered development engine,
Yep.
right? AIs, whatever we say, like AIs are not ready yet for purely agentic development workflows, where the developers is not typing anymore. Well, they're typing, they're prompting,
Prompting. Yep.
and then they have a huge role and a huge responsibility in terms of reviewing and approving, but they're not coding per se, right?
Yep.
If that is true, we are on a great path. If we are like 5 years away from this, then we are too
Too
early,
early. Yeah.
right? So if there was one thing that'd be this, but I have like I'm a tech enthusiast like you are, and I'm a big believer in AI. So I think our bet is fairly safe.
I would agree with you, Jerome. I think you're probably right on track with timing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Glad to hear.
Well, Jerome, this has been super fascinating. Where can people go to find Symbiotic and can they try the tool out?
Yeah, absolutely. On our website, ask for a demo. just fill in the form. You can see it. You can go on YouTube. We have some videos as well. In action is way better because we have a very high velocity. In 1 week, we'll have more
Yeah.
features and more cool stuff. And so the videos are kind of like not a good display of this. So yeah, come to us on the website, book a demo, and we'll make sure it's worth your time.
Thanks, Jerome.
Thank you, Matt.